I have been trying to perfect how to make kombucha at home for probably about a year now. And throughout the entire time, I have tried my hardest, I've researched, I have done a lot of trial and error, and along the way I just wasn't ever able to make my homemade kombucha taste good or taste like what you get at the store. So I wanted to make this video so that I could bring you all of the tips and tricks that I've accumulated over this past year so that I finally have a foolproof recipe for how to make your own kombucha at home so that it tastes just as good, if not better, than what you buy at the store. So there are a few things that you need if you're going to be making kombucha at home, and the ingredients and the tools really make a huge difference. So I would really recommend sticking to my recommendations because I've tried all of the methods and all of the tools, and these are the ones that I know work. The first thing that you're going to need is simple. You're going to need some boiling water. From there, you're going to need half a cup of some starter fluid. So basically that's kombucha that's already been made. You can buy that at health food stores, which will also usually come in a kit with a SCOBY, or you can see if there's a friend of yours that's making kombucha and they might be able to give you half a cup of their starter fluid so that you can make your own at home. You're also going to need 1 cup of sugar. That's white sugar, and organic sugar is preferable, but I've made it with non-organic sugar before and it's been totally fine. You cannot use anything other than white sugar. You can't use honey or other forms of sugar. It has to be white sugar. The reason for that is that SCOBYs actually are live organisms and they're pretty picky about what food they eat, funny enough. And they really like white sugar, but if you put anything else in there, like a coconut sugar or something like that, it's just not going to work and your SCOBY is not going to grow and your kombucha isn't going to be very good. So stick to organic white sugar whenever you can. The next thing that you're going to need is some caffeinated tea. So I typically go for loose leaf tea and I usually use black tea. You can try to use some caffeinated green tea or things like that, but I've had the best results with black tea personally. A big money saver here is to get your loose leaf tea from Bulk Barn. I use about 1/3 of a cup of loose leaf black tea for each batch, and I'll put them in these little tea bags from David's Tea. So you can just put your loose leaf tea in there and then you pull the string and you can just throw it right in. A key thing here is that your tea needs to steep for a really long time. I'm talking to the point where it's almost looking opaque through the glass jar. So the longer you leave those tea bags in, the better. You cannot use caffeine-free tea for your kombucha, so you have to make sure that you're using a highly caffeinated black tea or a green tea, or you're just gonna have really bland, not fizzy kombucha, which is not what anyone wants. When making kombucha at home, there are 2 main steps. The first is your initial fermentation process, and then after that comes the second fermentation process. And these are both really important. During the first fermentation process, all you're doing is taking the raw ingredients and making kombucha essentially. So what you're gonna get from there is a kombucha that's fizzy, but it's not going to taste probably the way that you want it to. Some people like it plain, but where you get the flavoring is from your second fermentation. The initial fermentation process should take about 7 to 14 days. There's quite a range there. Now, ideally, I have typically stuck to 7 days. And the reason for that is because if you're going to do a second ferment, and that's when you're going to be adding all of your flavorings, you want your kombucha to be a little bit sweet still. After about 7 days of your initial fermentation process, you're going to then take that kombucha and put it into individual jars, and this is when you're going to be doing your flavoring. The key here is to make sure that your jars are completely airtight. So this is super important. If you don't use an airtight jar, then it's not going to get fizzy and it's not going to get that delicious flavor. Now, for this, I would highly recommend actually investing in a really good jar that is airtight. I made the mistake of going to Dollarama, just getting some cheap jars that had this kind of clasp that I thought would work, but they were not airtight enough, so I could never get it fizzy enough. So these are actually from the Bay. They were on sale for $3, so I got a few of them. Otherwise, Swell bottles work really well for this stuff because they're airtight, or anything that you can really screw on that lid and know that there is absolutely no air getting in or out. That is absolutely crucial if you want fizzy, delicious kombucha. So what you'll do for the next part, for the second fermentation, is you're going to want to fill your jar about 1/5 of the way with a fruit drink, or you can put raw fruit in, or you can use a tea that you've added sugar to. Now the point here is that you want some more sugar to be added to your first batch of kombucha. That's because in order for the kombucha to get fizzy, it needs to continue fermenting. And the way that it does that is through getting more sugar. So typically what I'll do is I'll get an all-natural fruit juice that has no sugar added, because fruit is naturally high in sugar. And I'll just fill that about 1/5 of the way into the jar. And then from there, you will add your kombucha from the first batch up to the top, leaving some space. So that's another thing. You do not want to go all the way to the top. There needs to be a little bit of space for the fermentation to occur. So you can also play around with how much juice you add. You can add just a little bit, or you can add a lot. It's just going to change the flavor, and it will also change the amount of fizz probably. So it's just a matter of experimentation at that point. Now, the next step is to let this new batch sit for about 3 days tops, I would say, for your second fermentation. If you leave it too long, it's going to explode. This has happened to me before. Like I said, it's been a year of trial and error and crazy kombucha tales in this apartment. So what happened to me was during my second fermentation process, I left it too long, and then obviously the pressure inside the jar is getting so high because it's just fermenting and fermenting and fermenting in this super airtight container or jar, and my entire jar exploded. So it happened right from the bottom down. It just shattered. Scared the absolute crap out of me also. So I really don't want that for you. So make sure that 3 days after you've jarred for your second ferment, you open it up. Now it's gonna sound like you're opening a bottle of champagne because there's been a lot of fermentation happening. So do it over the sink, keep anything away from your eyes, and just prepare yourself for that kind of popping sound. That's a really good sign. It means that you've had some fizz happening, and that's really, really good. It's gonna make your kombucha taste really good and really fizzy. After you have opened your jar after the second ferment, you want to immediately put it into the fridge. You can just stick the whole jar in there. So putting it in the fridge greatly decreases the rate of that fermentation, and it's just gonna stay exactly how you want it. When you're storing your kombucha for the first ferment and the second ferment, you want to make sure that it's in a dry, preferably dark, warmer place. So what I'll do is I'll just put it in a cupboard at the back for the first ferment. For the second ferment, I can typically get away with it just being left on the counter, and that's usually fine. A good tip that I've learned the hard way is to set reminders in my phone of when I need to check my kombucha for the first ferment and when I need to taste it for the second ferment. After you put your kombucha in the fridge, what I'll often do is, if I want to just take a batch for when I'm running errands or something like that, I'll just put it in an individual serving size jar, and then that way I can go run errands and have kombucha on me, because I don't want to be lugging this massive jar around, obviously. I have just collected a bunch of jars from kombucha I've bought from the store. They're a great size, they're glass, so they're BPA free, and I like the screw top too. So if you are drinking kombucha from the store at the moment, just start keeping your jars. You can just peel off the labels, and then you can use them for however long you want for your own kombucha. Remember that your SCOBY is a live organism, so it needs food, and it also grows, which is really strange. So after your initial ferment, you will notice when you go to make your next batch that your SCOBY has had a daughter SCOBY grow. So it'll be attached to the bottom, and you can just gently peel it away, and then you can throw that SCOBY in the garbage. You can get your own second batch going, or you can give that to a friend so that they can start making their own kombucha. It's really important to gently rinse your SCOBY with lukewarm water in between batches. Gently run it under some water and very, very gently just clean it off with your fingers, making sure that your hands are clean. For your first batch, here's what you're gonna do. The first thing is that you need a big gallon-sized jar. I ordered mine from a website, but you can also go to Bulk Barn. They have jars that are this size and they're glass, which is perfect. You also want to make sure that you don't put a lid over your jar for the first fermentation process because it's just too tight. You want to just put a thin cloth over top with an elastic band and that'll do the trick. The first thing that you're going to do is clean out your jar with no soap, just some hot water is fine, and you're going to put your 1 cup of white sugar in first. From there, you're going to take some boiling water, pour it into the jar, and then you're just going to use a spoon to really stir that sugar in so that it's well dissolved. From there, you can add your tea. So I'll add my tea, give it a little bit of a stir, and then from there you can just add more hot water until it's close to the top part of the jar. Now remember when you're adding the water that you need to have room for your SCOBY, which is going to take up a little bit of volume in your jar of water. And you're also going to need space for your 1/2 cup of your starter fluid, which is just kombucha from your first batch. You cannot use kombucha from your second fermentation process as your starter fluid. Now after you've put your tea bags in, you're just going to want to leave them in there for quite some time. I will sometimes leave mine overnight. At a minimum, I would probably say you want to leave them for about 4 hours. And you really want to make sure that that water is almost opaque if you're using black tea, because you want that tea to have steeped for a really long time. That's what's going to give your kombucha its really nice flavor. After it's steeped for as long as you'd like it to, remove your tea bags, and then before adding your 1/2 cup of starter fluid and your SCOBY, you want to make sure that that water has cooled down to room temperature. Otherwise, you're going to kill the good bacteria, and then the benefits of your kombucha have completely gone away, which isn't good at all. From there, you're going to put your cloth over top with an elastic band, stick it in a shelf or in a dark place, and then just let it sit for 7 to 10 days probably is best. And then after that, you'll move on to your second fermentation. You're just going to take a funnel out and pour a little bit of fruit juice into the jar that you're going to be using. Once you've added your juice, you can just add your kombucha from the first batch and secure the lid tightly. Before drinking your kombucha, it's a good idea to just strain it quickly, just so that you don't have any bits of SCOBY or any tea leaves or anything like that lying around. But from there, you have your own homemade kombucha. So good. Nice and fizzy, nice and flavorful, sweet but tart, delicious. So I really hope that these tips have been helpful for you. If you have any questions at all, do not hesitate to ask me. I probably have been there and hopefully will have an answer. If you go to www.fresh-insight.ca, you can reach me through there, and you can always feel free to connect with me on Instagram, Facebook, and Twitter as well. Thank you so much for watching. If you liked this video, go to my social media pages and give them a like to see more content like this. I'll see you next time.